The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city square, where the smell of grilled onions and sizzling meat hung heavy in the air. The food truck sat at the far end of the plaza, its faded paint peeling in some corners, the old sign barely readable. Yet despite its shabby look, people lined up eagerly, drawn by the promise of cheap, filling meals that could comfort a weary soul after a long day at work. Inside, she worked non-stop, her small frame moving with quiet determination. She wore an old apron smeared with sauce, her hair tied back hastily in a bun with loose strands falling across her face. Sweat clung to her temples, but she didn't stop. Every movement mattered, placing buns on the grill, scooping fries into trays, wiping down the counter between orders. She barely had time to look at the faces in front of her. To her, they blurred into a routine rhythm of hungry voices and hurried exchanges. Sometimes she caught glimpses of people wrinkling their noses at the sight of her cracked hands or ignoring her polite smile, as if she was invisible. She had learned long ago not to let it sting. What mattered was finishing the day without running out of food, and maybe, just maybe, earning enough to cover rent without skipping another meal herself. The line stretched long, filled mostly with office workers in shirt sleeves, students with tired eyes, and a few parents holding their children's hands. Then, tucked in between them, stood a tall man whose presence seemed to disturb the balance of the line. His dark tailored suit was perfectly pressed, the gleam of his watch catching the fading sunlight, his shoes spotless against the dusty pavement. Everything about him screamed wealth, success, power. He did not belong here, not in this line, not in her world. Still, he waited patiently, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed not on his phone like the others but on her. She noticed him once, quickly, then forced her eyes away. She didn't have time for distractions, and men like him were dangerous in ways she didn't want to remember. To her, he was just another rich man passing through, perhaps curious to taste street food, for novelty. She lowered her head and called the next order, handing over greasy paper trays with a tired but automatic politeness. When she reached for the next bun, she stole another glance at him, tall, composed, unbothered by the impatient shuffling of the line behind him. Something about the way he stood there unsettled her, but she shoved the thought aside. Customers were customers. Rich or poor, they came, they ate, they left. As the line inched forward and he drew closer to the counter, her chest tightened with a strange unease she couldn't explain. She brushed it off with the same resilience she always carried, telling herself he was nobody special, just another face among many. Yet deep down, something inside her stirred, as if her heart was warning her that this encounter was about to change everything. The man finally stepped up to the counter, and for the first time, she got a proper look at him up close. His presence was overwhelming. He had the kind of confidence that filled the air, the kind that came from years of power and success. The sharp cut of his suit and the faint scent of expensive cologne made him seem even more out of place in front of her old, battered food truck. She avoided meeting his eyes, focusing instead on the grill as the sound of sizzling meat crackled between them. "What would you like?" she asked, her tone polite but flat, the same voice she used with everyone. She didn't expect him to care, men like him never did. He watched her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "One burger," he said, his voice low and steady, almost too calm. She gave a quick nod, turned to assemble the order, and tried to push away the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Her hands moved quickly, buns toasted, patty placed, toppings layered just right. She slid the finished burger into a tray, added a handful of fries, and set it on the counter with practiced ease. "That'll be $5, she said, keeping her tone professional, her eyes fixed on the tray instead of him. She had learned it was safer not to linger, safer not to care. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp bill, far too new, far too clean compared to the crumpled notes she usually saw. He handed it to her, but when she tried to place the tray fully into his hands, he didn't take it. Instead, he let the silence stretch, his fingers brushing against hers lightly as if by accident. She frowned slightly and finally lifted her gaze to his. His eyes, dark, piercing, yet strangely familiar, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he leaned in, his voice so low only she could hear. "Still remember me?" Her heart jolted violently, her hand still hovering above the tray. The words echoed in her ears, cutting through the noise of the line behind him. Her mind scrambled, unsure if she had heard right. Still remember me? What did he mean? She blinked rapidly, her lips parting but no sound escaping. She searched his face, the strong jawline, the confident eyes, the faint trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Something inside her stirred, tugging at memories she had buried deep. The world outside the food truck seemed to fade. The chatter of waiting customers blurred into background noise. She could only see him, feel the weight of his gaze, and hear the haunting softness of his question. Her pulse raced, her grip on the counter tightening as she tried to breathe steadily. A strange sense of recognition began to flicker at the edges of her memory, but she couldn't place it yet. All she knew was that this man wasn't just another customer. His words had unlocked a door inside her, a door she hadn't dared to open for years. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the edge of the counter, her eyes never leaving his face. For a heartbeat, she felt as if she was staring at a stranger, but then, like a spark catching fire, the image of a boy surfaced in her mind. A boy with messy hair and torn shoes, sitting beside her on the cold orphanage steps, dividing a small piece of stale bread so she wouldn't go hungry. His eyes had been the same, dark, watchful, filled with something gentle even in a world that had been cruel to both of them. She gasped softly, the air catching in her throat. It can't be, she whispered to herself. Her lips trembled as she dared to say the name she had not spoken in years, the name tied to her only friend in the years of loneliness and hunger. The moment she spoke it, his faint smile deepened, his eyes softening with unmistakable recognition. The food truck, the long line of impatient customers, the noise of the busy square, all of it blurred into nothing. All she could see was him, standing there in a suit that spoke of power and success, yet looking at her not as a customer, not as a stranger, but as if he had found something he had been searching for. She shook her head, disbelief flooding her. You disappeared. They said you were gone, taken away, adopted." Her voice cracked as memories tumbled out, each one heavier than the last. She remembered the night he had been taken from the orphanage, the way he had turned back to look at her through the rain-soaked window of a car, his lips mouthing words she could never forget. "One day, I'll come back for you." And here he was. He leaned closer, his voice gentle, almost reverent. "I never forgot. Not a single day." His words, wrapped around her like a warmth she hadn't felt in years, piercing through the hardened walls she had built to survive. Her chest ached with a strange mixture of joy and sorrow. She wanted to believe him, but life had taught her that promises were fragile things. Still, the way he looked at her, with the same sincerity he had as a boy, made it impossible to doubt. Tears welled up in her eyes, her vision blurring as she tried to speak. She had spent so many years thinking she was invisible, unnoticed, forgotten by the world. And yet here he stood, a man who had risen above it all, carrying the same memory she had clung to in her loneliest nights. Her heart pounded, her hands shaking as she whispered, almost afraid to break the spell, You really came back." He nodded slowly, his smile gentle but steady, his gaze never wavering. "I told you I would." Her breath trembled as she tried to steady herself, her fingers brushing against his when he finally took the tray. That single touch sent a shiver through her, stirring emotions she had long buried. For years, she had lived in survival mode, working endless shifts, sacrificing her own comfort so the food truck could stay open another day. No one had ever stopped to truly see her. Customers came and went, strangers passed her by, and life had been a series of exhausting days blending into sleepless nights. But now, standing before her, was the boy who had once been her whole world, the boy who had promised her hope when life had offered none. The corners of his mouth curved as he looked at her with quiet certainty. "I kept my promise," he said softly, his voice steady despite the noise of the bustling square around them. To him, this wasn't just a meal, it was a reunion, a moment he had carried in his heart for years. Her throat tightened, tears welling until she had to blink them away. She wanted to say 100 things, to ask where he had been, how he had become this powerful man, why he had remembered her when so many others had left her behind. But her voice refused to come. Instead, her eyes spoke for her, glistening with disbelief, gratitude, and a fragile kind of joy. Around them, the line shifted impatiently, people muttering about the delay. She barely heard them. To her, time itself seemed to pause, holding them in a bubble where only they existed, two souls who had once been broken children, finding each other again in the most unexpected place. He reached out, almost hesitantly, and placed a hand over hers on the counter. The gesture was simple, but it carried a weight that left her breathless. "You're not invisible anymore," he whispered, as if he could read the years of loneliness she had endured. "I found you, and I'm not letting go again." Her tears finally fell, but this time she didn't hide them. She let herself feel the relief, the wonder, the strange ache of rediscovered hope. For the first time in years, she wasn't just the poor girl behind a food truck. She was someone worth remembering, someone worth waiting for. And as she met his steady gaze, a quiet certainty bloomed inside her. Life was about to change, not because he was a millionaire CEO, but because he was the boy who had once saved her with half a piece of bread and a promise that had survived the test of time.